Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the PixelCast. I am Jeremy Alessi, founder of PixelFest, and this week we are coming back after 2 weeks of doing, some different stuff. Like last week, it doesn't really count. We did a very short episode. I tried to give some updates, but the week before that, we recorded at our PixelFest Devs meetup, and I interviewed Joshua Janae and Joseph Musso at Pixels. It was a great time. We got to see what some other indie developers are doing here in our local community, and that's an episode that I really recommend going back and watching if you haven't already. It was a lot of fun, and I look forward to seeing some of you at the next PixelFest Devs meetup. Who knows, maybe I'll interview you on a future episode of the PixelCast. Now this week, as you can see, I want to talk about Untitled Goose Game. And I'm also going to dive a little bit into the Mode 7 Castlevania stuff that I've been doing, even though I shared with you a great video last week from Retro Game Mechanics Explained. Alex did a fantastic job already of explaining the Castlevania, and I'm glad that he moved that to the head of his queue at my request. That was a lot of fun. Alex has done some amazing work explaining how the Super Nintendo functions on all levels and all the effects. And after diving into the Super Nintendo manual, I have a great amount of respect for the work that he has done. I am sort of interested in making a Super Nintendo game, if for nothing else than to overcome the technical challenge of it. I was amazed at the games that were created back in the day, and now seeing the work that the developers had to go through, I'm even more amazed. The games were truly amazing. And so I also want to talk about that, and there's some updates for PixelFest that I want to share, and this week's probably going to be a relatively short episode, although I don't think it's going to be as short as last week's, but we'll see. Things are very busy, and so it is it's just one of those things, busy. So without further ado, let's talk about Untitled Goose Game. I noticed this game on the Nintendo Switch eShop, I don't know if it was a month or two ago, something. It sort of caught my eye, and I was like, that is so strange. And every now and again, I'll see a game that's released, and I'll see it just sitting in the new release section, and I'm like, what were these developers thinking? Like this, it's a strange name. The graphics don't look like what we typically think of as something that's going to be a commercial success, and it just overall it doesn't fit what we typically think of as a popular game. Now, in hindsight, that was crazy to think that, because Untitled Goose Game then went on to become the best-selling game on the Nintendo Switch eShop. I don't know if it's on other platforms, to tell you the truth, or not, but on the Switch at least, it overtook Link's Awakening as the best-selling game on the store. And so there's something to this game. I've played it. I've picked it up. I've played it. It is a lot of fun. It's a little bit like a stealth game where you're sneaking around with this goose, but when you get caught, not much really happens to you. So it's a little bit more about how you interact with the townsfolk in this town where this goose lives. And, you saw a quick clip of it right at the beginning of the episode there, and that's where I was, sort of tormenting this boy who was trying to get his soccer ball back, and, picked up the glass bottle. I was like, what are you going to do? Honked at him, So you can do this to all the folks, and the developers also came up with a lot of clever ways to be even more annoying than what you might think of on your own. So and one of the goals in that mission, which is pretty early in the game, so hopefully I'm not giving away any spoilers, but is to have somebody who has a shop sell somebody else's property back to them. And so you just think about the principle of that. It's terrible. It's so annoying. It's so awful. And that's what you're doing. But you're doing it with this goose, and so it's this animal. And so all the townsfolk are just they're looking around at this animal like, what are you doing? Some there's just some really memorable moments. The physics of the game and the animation really support the concept. I think the animations on the goose work incredibly well. As you can see, even when you're tapping the soccer ball with the goose's beak, the ball is bouncing appropriately, and it just really feels like you're a goose. And so credit goes to the developers for wonderful execution. Now, as great as the game is, as funny as it is, as well executed as it is, and I think it's really very much like an artsy type of title too. Like when we used to talk about games becoming art or games as art, I feel like this is that. It's something that only a game almost could capture. I feel like sort of taking the role of an annoying animal and going around and just haranguing people. But the the thing of it is, I have a saying I've been whipping out a couple of times over the last 2 or 3 years, I think. And the saying is that making games is like playing apples to apples with your drunk friends. And how I mean that is, when you're playing apples to apples, there is usually a very logical response, for the given circumstance. And most of the time, that very logical response is not the response chosen by your drunk friends when you're playing apples to apples. Probably not even your drunk friends, just any friends. The game has a way of being manipulated into being just what's unpredictable. And sometimes the most unpredictable answer is the one that everybody, that gets chosen by the player that chooses the card. And if you haven't played it, and it's been a while since I've played it, but I believe what happens is, if you haven't played apples to apples, that is, the main player that draws a card, they pick an adjective, and then everybody else has to throw down a noun that matches that adjective best. I can give you an example of once. I believe I won this hand. This is going back a while, 7 years ago. I think it was 7 years ago, when there was this poor woman. She was attacked by I believe it was her friend's pet chimpanzee. So somebody threw out the adjective dangerous, and I happened to have the noun chimpanzee. I did win on that hand. And that was logical, but I almost feel like that was lucky, because 90% of the other answers in the game were answers that they were entertaining for some reason or another, but they really weren't super logical, and they didn't necessarily fit the context of the situation all perfect, or the psychology of the person drawing the card. That's one of the strategies in the game, but it just tends to get random, and I've noticed this with games. So at any given time, a game will become a massive hit. And it could be something like Flappy Bird, it can be something like Minecraft, it can be something like Untitled Goose Game. And with each of these games, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of other examples of these games, they somehow break through all the noise of everything that's going on in the game industry. People would be talking about better graphics and more online multiplayer and increased connectivity and new feature X, Y, or Z that moves the whole genre forward. And then somebody comes out of left field with something with graphics that wouldn't traditionally be considered top of the line. You're not using the latest and greatest shaders with 90 million polygons and the latest mocap and cinematic techniques and all of that. And and I use those games as examples. And the game isn't super complicated or engaging or engaging, that's not the right word, but the games aren't super immersive per se, but something about those games becomes immersive in the sense that they hook you and bring you into their world. And it, like I said, to me, there is a little bit of a sense that it's like this apples to apples thing. So I've been making games for so long, and in a lot of cases, I'll make something and it'll either be early, or usually you're early, and you'll be like, oh, I made, and then something will hit and you'll be like, wow, I made that like 5 years ago, but the world wasn't ready for it, or it just didn't hit the right influencer or the right person yet, or whatever the case may be. Actually, there's an episode of Jimmy Fallon where he was showing off a game where you had to yell in order to move the character. And that was an idea that I had for a long time. Did a game jam game. I think we even shared it with PixelFest a couple years before, and it's something that we put out there. I don't think anybody really played it very much or commented on it. Maybe a couple of people, and for whatever reason, that group of people wasn't the right group to spread it, and and it didn't hit. As I've said, I've made games that have hit, and I really couldn't tell you why. When I made Crash for Cash, which was the first game that hit, I could come up with a couple of reasons as for why this game hit for some reason, but it really would just be guessing. It just happened to be that Crash for Cash was the right noun to throw down to a group of people that were looking to be entertained in some unpredictable fashion, and they chose that at the time. It wasn't the most logical response necessarily. I mean, there were some neat elements about it, but hey, why? And so looking at Untitled Goose Game, I just couldn't help but bring up this as a developer lesson that, it doesn't mean you shouldn't make games. Keep making games, by all means. Explore your creativity, your imagination, share with your friends. You never know when you're going to make a hit. And I think that's why people keep making games, because of the unpredictable nature of it. And that's a good thing. People like that. It keeps everybody guessing, what's going to be next. And it also, I think it motivates people to be extra creative. Now, when you are extra creative and you also do, perform a good execution on a game, and that game gets ignored, it is painful. I will tell you that. There have been a number of games where execution's been great, art's been great, concept's been great, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't catch. And no matter what you do, you cannot get this to catch. I could have seen that happening with Untitled Goose Game. I mean, when I just look at this game, I go, wow, this looks like this sort of artsy type thing, and I think it could have gone unnoticed. But thankfully for House, it did not go unnoticed. And the game has I think it sold 100,000 copies in the first 2 weeks. And of course, if you search for YouTube videos now, the thing is just blowing up. People are laughing at it. It's hilarious. I've played it with the family. The whole family finds this game to be hilarious. They're just all laughing and squealing, and so they've really captured some magic here. And I'm not going to say that there's it almost suggests that there's no skill involved or something like that to say that making games is like apples to apples, and that's not the case. Obviously, making a game, it's a tremendous amount of skill, and there is timing and there's all that, but there is this unpredictable element, and you have to be prepared for that when you're going in and you're making games. No one can predict what games are going to hit, and that's what keeps the industry thriving and interesting, and keeps people creative and all that. So let's see. With that, I want to move into Castlevania, or let's see here, or Castlevania / Pilot Wings. So I took my favorite background level from Pilot Wings, and that's what I use. So in the upper right corner now, you see the Unity window, and you see the background from Pilot Wings being manipulated, just like the Castlevania background, the 4:3 rolling barrel background. Now, this is all being done at a per pixel level, and we've got the acceleration and all that. Now, I didn't put the platforms and everything in. As I mentioned last week, I've basically been doing some, I've been studying, I've been, following up with people that actually developed for the Super Nintendo, asking them questions. I've gone through and looked at a lot of other attempts at Mode 7. So if you're searching code forums, there are a lot of people, and it's in all different languages. Some people are writing in Python and Java, and I don't know if there was much in C#, but I was able to look at that code, get some of the ideas. For example, one of the ideas was pretty simple. It was that you can plot X, Y, and you can divide by some Z. You could even use the Y to create the Z variable. And in fact, this demo is using that in order to create the cylinder. So there's an equation. I believe I have a scale, and then I subtract the cosine of the screen height divided by 2 minus the Y variable as we're plotting pixels from top to bottom, and then divide that by the screen height. divided by 2 again. And that is what allowed for this shape. And when you're working with sine and cosine and the unit circle, if you've taken these math classes, and really long story short, the thing is with a sine or cosine wave, you get something that will start at 1, it will go to 0 to -1 to 0, and then back to 1. And so there is basically like a cyclical nature to it. And the way that it's used here is that in the center of the cylinder, of course, we're looking for something like a 0. And then at the top and bottom of the screens, we're looking for the cylinder to come closer to us. And that's where we're looking for that 90 or 270 degree angle, which if we take the sine or cosine of that will net us a 1 or a -1. Now, if we use the absolute value of that, of course, then we could stretch this in or out of the screen. And that's what gives us that shape, that basic shape. Now, some more that goes into this. The equations are actually relatively complex. I could probably dedicate an entire episode and or boot camp to explaining this particular demo. But, I think long story short, using sine cosine waves and using essentially a z value to divide the pixel value is sort of what led to this, right? And it's very interesting how you can just take an XY plot on a two-dimensional image, divide it by a z value, and then transplant it. Basically what you do is you're transforming pixels from one flat 2D image, and then you're putting it on another flat 2D image. You're just choosing a new location for it to make it look as if there's 3D warping going on there. But this is not 3D. There's nothing 3D about this. That's just a two-dimensional image that's being written to in real time. It's almost like a real-time Photoshop filter that's going on there. But very, very neat, very interesting doing this work. I'm having a lot of fun doing this Mode 7 research. One thing that I do want to mention, though, is that this was an amalgamation of probably 3 or 4 sources that I saw and trying to put that all together. But I don't believe this was completely accurate the way this was done, although it mimics Mode 7 very well with its per pixel effects. Mode 7 actually involves 8 parameters that were registers in the Super Nintendo hardware that could be set. And essentially those are a horizontal position, a vertical position, an origin point whereby rotations or scale would take place from. So that could be in the center of the screen, it could be in the top left corner, any point on screen could be that. And then there are 4 other variables called A, B, C, and D. And as near as I can tell, A will basically control how much that image is stretched. B will control the angle for which it is skewed. D will control the vertical stretch. And then C is, I don't know why they chose this order exactly, but C will be the, I'm trying to think, did I do the horizontal, vertical skew? One of the other skew. And so now I wrote a component also, and I plan to share this. I plan, when this is all done, to share this so that you can pull it into Unity and you can actually mess with Mode 7. Now, the neat thing about it is if you start, dragging those variables around just on the component, you can create really cool 3D effects, and you can see how the developers back in the day created all these effects. It is, essentially a one-to-one. Now, going from just dragging those sliders and turning it into like actionable things like predictable rotation or movement that is relative to your rotation, things like that get a little trickier. And that's sort of where I'm at right now with it. Is I have relative motion so that I can go along essentially a forward vector, and I can rotate at any angle and then hit the forward key and go forward. And that what I have very much looks like the Pilot Wings top-down perspective, say if you're in the rocket belt. And what I'm looking forward to doing, though, is then going back to this amalgamation, which it's not really super accurate as to how Mode 7 worked on the Super Nintendo, but essentially creating a library of these functions and then sharing that probably through the PixelFest website, but we'll see what portal it ends up being released on. It's been very, very interesting, doing this. If anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to send an email or a message on Facebook or YouTube. And let's engineer cool stuff, and let's make some stuff. And I'm actually thinking what we probably will do with this is create a Mode 7 game jam, using this component. That's what I'd like to see in the community, and maybe we can share it even beyond that. Now, let's go ahead and put that away. Obviously, the thing that is on your mind most, probably if you're watching this, I'm trying to share, other things and broaden your horizons, is PixelFest 2020 or PixelFest Open Source. I think the official name and branding and all that's not decided yet, but let's say internally PixelFest Open Source. Last week I had a great meeting with one of our anchor partners and the city of Norfolk, and I am now there's a lot of moving parts to getting this one going, but I am looking forward to a response very soon to ensure that the location and the date are things that we can work with. And as soon as I have that solidified, I will let you know. And this way you can start making your plans for PixelFest 2020. Now, if you're out there, if you're one of our folks that's been a vendor or an indie developer or an artist in the past, and you're seeing this, or if you've since started doing those things, if you're involved in any of that, or if you have a company you want to sponsor, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can send a message on Facebook, YouTube. You can email community@pixelfest.org, contact@pixelfest.org. Any of those will work. And I'd love to hear from you.